2024 delivered a brand new lineup of horror films, but which ones will haunt us forever and which should just stay buried? Let's rank every horror movie that I watched released in 2024, from bone-chilling brilliance to more forgettable frights. Hi guys, I hope you're all doing really well. My name is Sarah and welcome to What the Horror, the channel where we talk about horror movies old and new. Yes, today we are finally taking a look back at all of the new horror films that I watched this past year and ranking them. While 2024 didn't, in my opinion, reach the heights of 2022, it is still a marked improvement from 2023. There is a vast number of films being released on both streaming and thankfully on the big screen. And while we still had the usual sequels and prequels, we also saw a lot of original material, which, whether we like it or not, is always exciting. Because you never know if you're going to discover a new lifelong favourite, or a dud. We also saw more of the new trend that has appeared in horror in the last year, adaptations of beloved children's storybooks. And while some were a genuine surprise, some just missed the mark. In fact, before we get into the ranking, let's do a bit of admin and cover the criteria for my choices, because I'm telling you now, you probably won't agree with all of my choices. In fact, I can guarantee that you won't, but that's okay. So the way that I rank these films is based on a mixture of factors. Number one, how good of a film it is technically in terms of narrative, acting, visuals, effects, etc. Because let's be honest, it matters. Number two, my own personal enjoyment while watching the film, as in, it may be an incredibly well-made film, but if I didn't have a good time, then that is going to knock it down the list. And number three, the rewatchability of the film, which, I'll be honest, is important to me. If I can tell this is one I'll revisit or one I want in my physical media collection, then that moves the film up the list. I also just want to say that I don't tend to like to rag on films. These are films made by people that have potentially tried their best and they've made a film and I haven't. And this is just my opinion. So even the films down at the bottom of the list, I do still try to find a positive in them. There are very few films on this list that I am actually going to rant about. And one last thing before we get going, I haven't seen every horror film that was released this year. So you may find some that you loved missing from this list. But I do still have 44 horror films to cover, so let's get into the ranking starting at the bottom and working my way up to my top 10 favourites of the year. The bottom entry of this ranking is The Mousetrap. As Steamboat Willie entered the public domain, we were treated to this interpretation of the classic character, and let me tell you, I did not enjoy this film. To say that I tried to find a positive in every film, this just missed the mark for me. But like I said, I do try to find the positives. So let me say that I did think the lighting in the arcade setting was pretty good. But aside from that, you had a seriously missed opportunity with this killer. You had forgettable characters with weak dialogue. You had a kill and reaction to said kill lifted straight from Scream 2, which is unforgivable. And there was no explanation as to why the killings were happening. No reason to care for the people being killed off, and no good kills to enjoy. However, we do have Screamboat coming out next year, which is another adaptation of Steamboat Willie, so maybe that film will be able to make the most of that opportunity. Then we have Bloodline Killer, which I watched purely because Shawnee Smith was in it, and I have to ask, why was Shawnee Smith in this? The cold open isn't strong enough to create interest. The timeline of the killer is hard to understand. Shawnee is for some reason the mother to two 40-year-old men, and the ending was a dud for me. Then we have Stream. Now this is a horror film that has been cited as a film made by horror fans for horror fans. And this was a film whose production was delayed, I believe, around the 2020 time, and was actually crowdfunded by horror fans to have it made. Now this I have respect for. I think it's great that we have a horror film that has been supported by horror fans and that they can get enjoyment from, and I defy you to find a horror film that stars Dee Wallace, Tony Todd, Jeffrey Combs, Danielle Harris, David Howard Thornton, Bill Moseley, Felissa Rose, Tim Curry, and not want to watch that film. However, this one just wasn't for me. Then we have Night Swim. This is a feature film that is actually an expansion on a short film of the same name. I have to say, in my opinion, the short film is far more effective. I think it should have remained as a short and didn't quite translate as a feature film. However, it is not, in my opinion, the worst film of the year. Next we have Sting. This is first of 2 spider horror films on this list. This unfortunately is down towards the bottom of my list. This was not one for me. I can understand how this might be quite scary for some audiences, especially those of you who are not a fan of a spider. However, outside of having some pretty good practical effects and practical gore, I just didn't understand who this film was made for. I didn't find any personal enjoyment in this one. Then we have A24's I Saw the TV Glow. Then we have Azrael. This is a horror film starring Samara Weaving, who up until this point has never let me down in a film. But the film itself, especially in terms of narrative, is a big miss for me. I think that when your story isn't exactly easy to follow unless you read a synopsis or guide outside of the film, that to me is a problem. It's very hard to understand that Samara Weaving was actually part of this cult that is following her, and this film is essentially Samara Weaving being chased through the woods for the runtime, being captured, escaping, captured, escaping. It is one of those horror films that has tried to go for a sense deprivation like we've seen with Hush and A Quiet Place, but just felt more of a gimmick than a success in this one. Then we have The Crow. Now this is the remake of the Brendan Lee The Crow. This is a film that for the most part I just didn't feel was needed. I didn't feel like anybody was crying out for a remake of The Crow, and I think there was some concern that, seeing as how there is tragedy surrounding the original film, did it really need to be remade, and was it, I don't know, was it the right thing? Was it morally right to remake it? But, you know, Bill Skarsgård is a talented actor, so I did check it out. Yeah, this is not a film that was needed, and I think while there are some interesting sequences, especially a fight scene that happens at the Opera House and some interesting uses of score and soundtrack, this is not a film that I got a huge amount of enjoyment from. If I was going to watch a Crow film, I would watch the original. And I think the crime of this film is that it just isn't needed. Then we have good old Blumhouse. Again, we have Imaginary. I imagine, like Night Swim, this one is going to be at the bottom of a lot of people's lists. It's not right at the bottom of mine because, to be honest with you, it just wasn't the worst of the year. I think it was an interesting premise. We have had killer dolls and killer scarecrows, so why not killer imaginary friends? And in terms of the imaginary worlds, there were some interesting sets and sequences that were made. And as I said, for enjoyment wise, I can imagine myself rewatching this, perhaps with my mini-me, we enjoy a kind of so bad it's good film. It's not a brilliant one, but I found some moments of enjoyment in it. So I'm more forgiving of it than I think some people are. Then we have The Strangers Chapter 1, and talking of being forgiving of horror films. Now, I think that in terms of visuals, this film is a very nice looking film. I think that the colour theory in it is very pleasing. However, the fault with this film is that it, again like The Crow, is not needed. This is not a beat for beat remake of the original The Strangers, but it is very, very similar. There is no shock or surprising it because it is following the same formula. So we're asking the question, why has this been made? Now, as it is the first installment in a trilogy, perhaps with hindsight, this film will get more love as we see where the story unravels. I didn't hate this one. Again, it was a fine watch. I didn't regret the time I'd spent in the cinema watching it, but I just don't think it was needed. Then we have one of my biggest disappointments of the year, and that is Cuckoo. This is a film that has been on the it's coming out, it's been released list for many a year. I remember including this back, I think, in 2021. So a lot of people were excited for this one and anticipating this one. I was one of those, especially as it has Dan Stevens in. I am a fan of him and was excited to see what he did in this role. And maybe it was just me, but I did not get this film. And I will take that maybe the flaw is with my own understanding of it rather than the film itself. But it just didn't work for me. I will give it a rewatch because I stand on the hill of rewatches matters, so I will give it another try, but as of a first watch, I was left wanting. I did not understand what the film was going for. Then we have the latest installment in the VHS franchise with VHS Beyond. This one was streaming on Shudder and had contributions from people like Mike Flanagan and Justin Long. So there was a lot of excitement surrounding this one. I personally really enjoyed that they went for the alien angle with it, but again, this, because it's an anthology, like with previous VHS films, there are some entries that are stronger than others. There were some in this that I did really enjoy. The opening one, very much in the vein of a Resident Evil game. I liked that creative choice. There were some that I liked less. There were some that were difficult for me to watch personally, like the one with the skydiving, because I get motion sickness. That is a personal thing. But even with Justin Long's entry, it was much more body horror, which I am not a huge fan of. And it also felt out of place, that one that was much more about body horror than aliens, like the other entries. However, the entry from Mike Flanagan and Katie Siegel it was a very strong one. The next one is quite a surprise for me, because I would have imagined this one being much further down my list, and that is Don't Turn Out the Lights. This is a film that follows a group of teens on a road trip to the Blue Light Music Festival. In the first 3 minutes, I almost turned this film off because the characters and the dialogue were insufferable, but I am glad I stuck with it, because if you are a fan of cheesy, trashy, early noughties horror films like Wrong Turn, then you might find some enjoyment in this one. This doesn't have the best acting, and in terms of setting, it reminded me of Wind Chill. A car breaks down, you're in one location, but there were some moments that intrigued me that were well structured and well written, and I actually had much more fun with this than I expected to. So for that reason alone, it is higher up the list. Then we have In a Violent Nature. Now, this I know for some people will be higher up their lists, but for me, the cardinal sin of this film is that it was just boring. Yes, there were some pretty shocking and violent kills, which kept it a little bit interesting, and I did appreciate that the soundtrack of this film was mostly footsteps walking on forest and undergrowth and birds tweeting. I did like that. I also felt that it had elements of video games to it, as we're following the POV of the killer and you hear little bits of conversation off in the distance. However, I just felt like it was just a little bit too boring, and I think the violent kills were there just for the sake of it rather than for a purpose and for the narrative. Then we have an entry that I think will probably get the most reaction from people for it being so high, because along with Night Swim and Imaginary, I know that this next one will also probably be some people's worst of the year, but not for me. I do like to keep you on your toes, and I don't like to conform, so Afraid is my next entry. Yes, it is a predictable film. Yes, you could make the argument that it's not a good horror film because it is not scary in the slightest. However, I will make the argument that that doesn't make it a bad film. I think that it has a goal and it achieves that goal, and there are good points to it, so it's a good enough movie. I'm very intrigued in the evolution of the discussion around and the technology around AI and artificial intelligence, in terms of how quickly it is developing, our use of it, the correct usage of it, and the benefits and dangers of it. And with Afraid, it never sets out to just simply say tech bad. Instead, what it does is it works in the grey areas of here's the good aspects of tech, here's the bad aspects, here's the dangers. But mostly, here are the dangers of tech when humans use it. So I appreciate it is not ramming it down our throat of tech bad. It gives us some information for us to make our own decisions. And I think it's good that it also commented on the dangers of tech when it's involved in children's lives as well. I think that we need to have this discussion more, and it needs to be portrayed in media more in an accurate, educational and safe way. I can hear you all kicking off in the comments already. Okay, next we have Tarot. Now this one is where it is simply because I had a good enough time with it and I can see myself rewatching it. There are films like Polaroid, Bye Bye Man, what's the other one? The Ring, things like that. I love a curse film where somebody has the curse and it passes on to them, like Smile. I love it when they go away and they go into research mode to the library or to the laptop. These are the kind of films that me and my mini-me love to watch together. So when I watched Tarot, I knew this is one that I would rewatch with my mini-me to enjoy, just because it's fun, it's cheesy. Some of the character designs from the tarot cards were quite interesting. However, it is a very dark film, so it's hard to see them in all their glory. But there were some okay moments in it. Okay, this is not the worst of the teen, there's a cult, there's a curse kind of horror film. So it is where it is. Then we have a film called Double Blind. This is one that I think is less well known, but it's a fine enough watch. It's definitely one of those one location horrors that can feel a little claustrophobic. It had its strengths, it had its weaknesses. Then we have Smile 2, the sequel to the 2022 Smile. This one, in my opinion, was a step down from the original. I'm happy to see some people have really enjoyed it. For me, I just don't think they did enough new things with it. I did like the commentary on the toxic nature and the dangers of celebrity and obsession and things like that. I think that was good that it went in a different direction, and the lead was a very strong performance, but it was one of the most egregious and in-your-face product placements I have seen, I think, since Jurassic World. I was sick of seeing those water bottles by the end of it. Then we have a Netflix horror film. This is one of two, I believe, on this list. This one is Time Cut. This follows the latest trend of time travel horror films in the vein of Totally Killer, It's a Wonderful Knife, Happy Death Day, that kind of thing. This one is one of the stronger ones. I do believe it's stronger than Totally Killer and It's a Wonderful Knife. I think that the two leads, the sisters, it was an interesting relationship. I do think that it was hindered by not being able to be too bloody. Most of the kills were off screen, and I think that you really had to suspend your disbelief in the ending. It was just a little too cheesy and cookie cutter for me. In my opinion, I would have gone in a much darker route that I think would have worked better, but there was still enjoyment to be had with this, and I'm all for horror films that are gateway horrors that allow new people to come in and be fans of horror, and I think that this is a good gateway film. Then we have Watchers, or The Watched, depending on if you're watching this in England, Ireland or America. This is based off of the book of the same name, and this is a directorial debut by M. Night Shyamalan's daughter, Ishana Night Shyamalan. The direction was fine enough. I think the setting was really beautiful, and I did particularly love the colour theory in this. However, it just wasn't one of the standout films for me. I did enjoy that they went down a more fantasy magical route. I think that that's perfectly acceptable, especially the laws and mythology, but I just don't think the ending was very strong, and I don't think that the most intriguing and engaging parts of the film were explored enough. Then we have Last Straw. This is one that I haven't seen many people talk about, but this is definitely one of those strongest middling horror films. I would say it's definitely more on the thriller side than pure horror, but there are some creepy moments and some horrific moments. There's some pretty good gore and violence in it if that's what you're looking for. I would say go blind into it, because there is something that happens into the runtime, into the narrative, and the less you know, I think the more fun that you will have with it. Then we have an interesting film. This is a Hulu release, and that is Mr. Crockett. The idea of a children's TV presenter on a VHS tape who is a killer. Now, this is a character that I thought wasn't really utilized in the film enough, but has the potential to be a really strong new addition to the horror villain world. I also loved the premise of neglectful and abusive parents being the one who were offed by the killer. This is something I think that everybody can enjoy. And I also like that the film was more forgiving. As with Afraid, it lived more in those grey areas of never just saying all parents bad. It had the commentary of, here, we're going to kill off the bad parents, but being a parent is difficult and you're going to make mistakes, but you have to go easy on yourself and forgive yourself sometimes, and it doesn't make you a bad parent. So I think in terms of the writing, it was really good. In terms of my favourite parts of the film and Mr. Crockett, I do think we hit peak in the cold open and we never really re-hit that. But I was pleasantly surprised by Mr. Crockett. Then we have Lisa Frankenstein, and this is a film like Cuckoo that I am a little bit disappointed by the fact that it's not higher up my list. And this is another one that I definitely do want to rewatch. I love Universal Monster films, so I was very excited about this one. The visuals are interesting, very 80s, very neon. The colours in it are vibrant. It makes it interesting and fun to watch. The performances are great. Catherine Newton, she's just a horror darling. But again, I was just left wanting more. It just felt lacking after watching it, but I am going to give it a rewatch. But like I say, it doesn't mean it's a bad film. It just means that in my opinion, there were better ones. So I will rewatch it. I just didn't enjoy it as much as I hoped I would. Then we have Caddo Lake. Now this one was much more of a thriller horror than a straight horror, but this one stars Dylan O'Brien. This is the first thing that I've ever seen him in. I never watched the Maze Runner films, but I was intrigued to see how he would do, and I was pretty impressed with his role. I think that as a lead he was very, very strong. Loved the setting. It was kind of like Louisiana swamps. I thought that made it really interesting in how they could physically move the action along. This is another one that I won't say too much about because I believe you should go into this completely blind and just enjoy the journey that the film takes you on. Okay, then we have a film that maybe, I don't know, some people would disagree with its placement, but this was never going to be down at the bottom of the list for me, and that is Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. If you've been around a minute, you know that Ghostbusters is one of, if not my favourite film of all time. And this was the first time that I actually got to see one of the Ghostbusters films on the big screen. And that alone made it really exciting. I have since in the year seen the first Ghostbusters on the big screen, but this was the first time. So seeing Ecto 1 up there, hearing the score, seeing the firehouse, things that are beloved from my childhood, that made it one of the most fun experiences for me, and I will definitely be rewatching it. This is one that I want to have on physical media, but is it one of the strongest installments? Probably not. It had less emotion to it than the last one did. But there was definitely still enjoyment there. You have the newer characters, but you have the old gang coming back, which we always love to see. And so impressive how much Dan Aykroyd did. In terms of, when you say action and stunts, there's nothing major there, but to say he's in his 70s, the stuff that he was doing, he's still game, he's still on it. The love and affection for this franchise, the people involved are very much the people who love this. And so that is what makes it good for me, even though the story isn't as strong as the first one. It doesn't have as much emotion as the last one, Afterlife. There's still heart to it there because the people making it are the people who love it and care about it. And so for long-term fans, die-hard fans, that is something that we're appreciative of. Plus, it had the addition of James Acaster, one of my favourite stand-up comedians. Yes, he was an unusual addition to this world, but a very welcome one, and I'm very glad that more people have been introduced to him. Then we have perhaps the biggest surprise of the year for me, and that is Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey 2. If you saw my ranking last year, you will know that the first Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey was a DNF for me, did not finish, and it was the worst film of the year last year. So consider me gobsmacked when I watched this sequel, and it turned out it's actually a really good film. The look of the villains is far stronger. The story is stronger. We have the addition of Owl and Tigger, which are perhaps two of the best parts of this. The kill scenes are so exciting and engaging, especially one at this rave happening in a warehouse involving Tigger. So, yes, one of the biggest surprises, but a pleasant surprise. Am I likely to rewatch this? I don't know. But now, based on this, am I likely to watch the rest of the Pooniverse? Yeah, yes I am. Then we have another surprise of this year, as in this was a film I put on Netflix, gave it a try, and actually had a really good time with it. And that is French Horror Under Paris. Again, if you know me, if you've been around, you know I'm a sucker for a shark horror movie. So watching this, I thought, great, it's probably going to be just a terrible shark movie, but I'll still find some enjoyment. So I was really surprised when it turned out that this actually has something to say. This is a film of two halves. The first film is based much more in reality and science, where it has something to say on environment and our treatment of oceans, the environment, and the consequences of this. How the shark in this film, sure, is the villain and the killer, but can never really be a true villain when they're just acting out in their nature And these are the consequences of humans' actions. So I appreciated that. But it was never in a ham-fisted way shoving it down your throat. They showed, didn't tell. And that made it horrifying enough. Cut to the second half of the film, and science says, yep, that's my cue to leave, and is out the door. And we go into batshit crazy territory. Science, there's no rules. All bets are off. And it becomes such a fun, wild ride. This version, this breed of shark is one that just doesn't exist, so there are no rules to it. There is this incredible sequence where they're having a swimming race in the Seine in Paris. Honestly, it's on Netflix. It's a great time. So in terms of my enjoyment, it was so good. That's why it's so high up the list. And for someone who's seen so many shark movies, I appreciate when one does something a little bit different. Okay, then we have Apartment 7A. Now this is the prequel to Rosemary's Baby, and I want to preface this with saying I have not seen Rosemary's Baby. I do want to, but I feel a little uncomfortable watching it considering who made it. However, the argument of separating art from artist, Rosemary's Baby is one of the cornerstones of horror, so I do feel like I should check it out. When I watched Apartment 7A, my enjoyment of it came from I hadn't seen Rosemary's Baby. The set in the apartment building is beautiful. The period setting, I love a horror film or any film set in a period setting. The idea of it being demons and cults, that is right up my street. So I enjoy this film a lot more than other people. And I know from looking at the reviews on Letterboxd, most people's argument is that it didn't need to be made because it was a rehash of Rosemary's Baby. For someone like me who hasn't seen the original, I really enjoyed this and it made me want to watch Rosemary's Baby even more. There were some very creative choices in terms of how they edited this. One of the, a scene where something horrendous is happening to our lead, it is portrayed as a sort of Broadway song and dance number. So there's some very creative choices. So I had more fun with this than most. Then going back to the Night Shyamalan family, we have M. Night Shyamalan's new film, Trap. First off, this was wonderful to see Josh Hartnett back in horror. We loved him in The Faculty. I know he's in 30 Days and 30 Nights or 30 Days of Night, but I haven't seen that one. He can definitely still deliver. His character was so fun to watch, even the cheesy elements of it, how he weaved and manipulated his way through parents, through police, through staff at the gig, how he played cat and mouse with the police was so enjoyable. The first two acts were the most fun, where he's making use, they're moving the action from the performance on stage to behind the stage to like underneath the building. The relationship between the father and the daughter was believable. They had great chemistry and it made him as a person more endearing, more likable. It made it more intriguing that this is clearly a guy who has good elements to him, but with this darker side. It lost me in the third act. The twist I kind of saw coming, just not 100% right. But it was worth it for that very end scene, that very end moment. It was very Hitchcock. If you've seen it, you'll know what I mean. There's a particular Hitchcock film that has a very similar ending scene. And yeah, just great to see Josh Hartnett back. Was it the best? No. But was it a fun time? And also, is M. Night Shyamalan going to get the award for Best Dad of the Year? Maybe, because I swear he made this film just to promote his daughter's music career. So that is parenting. Then we have the second French horror for me on this list, and that is Vermin, or in its English translation, Infested. This is the second spider horror as well, and this is a spider horror done well. Using high-rise flat, it was very reminiscent of the Spanish horror Wreck. You have these characters who live in this apartment building, trapped in this building with no escape, so they have to use the apartments, the stairwells. It also meant that with the use of the spiders, crawling through what do you call them, like air vents and floorboards and things like that. That made it really exciting as well because we have them turning up in all different areas. The spiders were used really well as well because this is a breed that can grow very large. So we start with small, medium, and then we get to just ridiculously sized spiders at the end. Not one for those of you who do not like spiders. I will make that very clear. When I watched this film, I felt incredibly itchy. When I filmed my review of it, I felt itchy. When I edited my review of it, I felt itchy. It's one of those that gets under your skin and stays there. There was one sequence in particular that stood out to me that involved a corridor spiders and cobwebs, and a light on a timer. And it was some of the most intense film that I have seen this year. Then we have the long-awaited sequel, Beetlejuice. Now, this is a film that I was not as excited about as some people. I do love Beetlejuice. Geena Davis is one of my favourite actors, but I just wasn't chomping at the bit like everybody else. An incredible cast, and you know, Michael Keaton has proved, what has he revisited this year? Batman and Beetlejuice. The guy's still kicking it in his 70s as well, like Dan Aykroyd. So I love that. When I first watched this, I didn't love it as much as I do now. There were moments, there was one that involved a flatulent baby Beetlejuice that got kicked across a room where I thought, what am I actually watching? And then I went away and thought about it, and I just became really grateful for this puerile nonsense that some films take themselves so seriously, and sometimes you do just want one that is a bit more daft and a bit fun. We cannot say it's not a well-made film. And this is a different Beetlejuice. I did say in my review that Beetlejuice just can't be the same as he was back in the 80s. Time has moved on, and what we got away with then we can't do now. So he has become much more of an anti-hero, and he has moments where you're like, yeah, you're cheering on Beetlejuice, but he still does have his dark humour, which is good. Then we have another big surprise for me. This is the second Netflix horror, and that is It's What's Inside. But this is a film that is so tightly written and tightly moved. No moment, no scene is wasted. Characters are perfectly explained to us, which is important considering what happens later in the story. Every actor is remarkable considering the challenges that they face and what they have to do in the film. And like I said, no time is wasted. We don't need to know the science of the suitcase. We don't need to know the science of how things work. That doesn't matter to us. So they move it and only ever tell us exactly what we need to know. The twists in it are really fun as well. Just when you think you've got all the twists, there are more. And this is a film that you'll want to think about afterwards. I thought about it for quite a while, and I ended up making solutions to all of it. I ended up working out what would happen with each character, and I love that when it's a film that you don't just forget when you've watched it. Okay, then we have Maxine, which is the final installment in the Ti West X trilogy. This was one of my most anticipated horror films of the year, given that Pearl was one of my favourite horrors of 2022, and X and Pearl are, well, the whole trilogy is one of my favourite things to happen in horror in decades. The characters that Mia Goth has given us in Maxine and Pearl, I absolutely adore, and I could not wait to revisit this world. Now, Pearl and Maxine were done back to back. Pearl and X were done back to back. Maxine had a bit of a gap. So returning to this world, it doesn't feel as seamless. And as time has moved on to the 80s as well and is now in LA rather than the farm, it does feel more separated from the trilogy than the other two do from each other. But this is one that was lower on my list after a first watch because I'd had such high expectations, it disappointed them. Then on a rewatch, knowing where the story would go and having no disappointment, I was just able to enjoy this story for what it was, and I enjoyed it so much more. This is a love letter to Hollywood and to films. There are nods to things like Hitchcock, Giallo, especially with The Killer. There are things like the Bates Motel included in it. I have my Norman Bates in the background. I love Psycho, it's one of my favourite films. And Mia Goth again as Maxine is so enigmatic and so fun to watch. In fact, this Maxine, I prefer to the Maxine in X. This is one who has grown, who is strong, and knows that she can save herself, she can handle herself. So yes, this is a perfect example of rewatches matter. I did really love this film. I cannot wait to own this in my collection. It's not as strong as the first two, but in my opinion, it doesn't matter. To be the worst of a really good trilogy is not a bad thing. Okay, so this next one is probably going to be like Afraid, where my placement of the film is the one that's probably going to tick off the most people, but I will explain why it's here, and that is The Substance. Now, just because it's not in my top 10 doesn't mean I think it's a bad film. I think this is an incredible film. I think this is so well made. I think it's an important film with an important message. It's so strongly acted, so strongly shot, and it is unpleasant. Like, I don't enjoy body horror. So for me, my enjoyment of the film, not only is it meant to make you feel uncomfortable, but I don't like body horror. So I felt even worse. There were some moments in the bathroom that I couldn't look at. And that's me. That's not the film. That's the film doing a good job. But as I said with my rating, It's not just how well it's technically made, it's my enjoyment and am I likely to rewatch it. However, like I said, it's a great film. This is a 4 out of 5 for me, and I am so happy that people have discovered this film and love it. It's one of their favourites, and the two leads are incredible. And the message itself, let's be honest, it's a message that is so prevalent and so relevant to today and needs to be talked about, and it is done in such a good way. It's such a clever film. Okay, talking to top 10, let's get into it. And so at number 10 we have Strange Darling. Now this one is much more of a thriller than a straight horror. However, we're putting it in horror, we'll go with it. This is one that I love, the non-linear narrative. The way that it works in chapters and then is jumbled works so well in terms of how it unravels its true narrative. I also think that Willa Fitzgerald did an incredible job. Considering I've only ever seen her in the Scream TV show, I was blown away by her performance in this. Some highlights for me would definitely be the use of music and, like I said, the non-linear narrative and the couple living in the woods, the old hippie and the old biker. Their life in the woods, that's my goal now. That's my life goal for retirement. Big, fatty, cooked breakfasts, playing jigsaws, living in the woods and just chilling. That's my life goal now. An incredibly good film. The only thing that stopped it from being higher for me was I wasn't sure 100% if this film is self-aware in that it knows what it's doing. I'm not going to get into spoilers, but if it's aware of what it's doing with its female lead, or if it is ever so slightly irresponsible in its portrayal of this character in terms of confirming some ridiculous opinions by some people. And this won't make sense if you haven't seen the film, but if you have, perhaps you'll know what I'm on about. If you follow me on Letterboxd, I explain it a bit more in that. But that's the only thing that makes me hold it back a little bit. Okay, then at number 9 we have Immaculate, and this is one of 3, I believe, religious films in my top 10. I love religious horror. I'm not one of those that thinks we should not have any more religious horror. I think the problem is we should have good religious horror. I think that people saying we have so much religious horror, we have so many slashers, we have so many haunted house, we have so many body horrors, we have so many alien. But the problem is, I think some people can be lazy with religious horror, and so it makes it less fun to watch, and so then we have negative attachments to it. And Immaculate and the other 2 in my top 10 are examples of doing a religious horror well. Now, Immaculate is one side of a coin of 2 films that we had very similar but dealing with the opposite side. So Immaculate is where we have an immaculate conception. And so while we had 2 films that were very similar, I think both were needed and both have earned a place. Both have a reason to exist. The visuals, like as in the setting, the religious house and the costuming, I think is really, really beautiful. Sydney Sweeney, this was my first example of her as an actor, and my goodness, does she deliver. The very end scenes, what she delivers physically and emotionally is absolutely incredible. There are some quite not graphic, but there is a little bit of body horror in here, but nothing unbearable, I would say, as someone who doesn't really like body horror. And like I said, I do think that it has a reason to exist. Okay, then at number 8 we have Late Night with the Devil. Now this one was higher up my list, but has just sort of slotted down a little bit as I have watched more films and as I have rewatched other films that have jumped up. All the difficulty and negativity surrounding the AI images aside, I think Late Night with the Devil is such a wonderful horror film. This is going to be a yearly rewatch for me around Halloween. I can tell. I have recently discovered a love of found footage horror films. This is a found footage done so incredibly well. The colour palette, the setting of the 70s is such a perfect aesthetic for me. I absolutely love it. I think that it is such a fun time, and I love how, because it is segmented into how they're recording for the show and then the backstage things, it keeps the audience hooked and engaged as you learn bits in snippets. You learn bits as you go, but then it just leaves you wanting more because something just didn't quite get explained. The ending for me was the weakest part. Like with a lot of films on this list, I think the build up to it was much stronger, and the ending didn't really do as much or explain as much as I would have liked it to. but it wasn't weak enough to pull the rest of the film down. Okay, number 7 is The First Omen. This is the second religious horror film in my top 10, and the other side of the coin that I was talking about. We have The First Omen and Immaculate. Immaculate is more the side of Jesus and Immaculate Conception. First Omen is like the Omen franchise, where it is dealing with the second coming of the devil, or the son of the devil, with Damien. And so with this film, it's not an original story like Immaculate in that we know how it ends. This is building up to the opening of The Omen. But even considering that, what they do to explain it is exciting enough. I could never have fully predicted that that is the route they would have gone. The direction and creative choices in this are wonderful. There are some beautiful moments that make it even more unsettling. Almost every shot in this film is stunning. Think about the scene post they've gone for a night out, and our lead character, she's laying on the bed and she's framed with her black hair sprawled out and her makeup is sort of melting down her face. Every moment in this film is beautiful. I was a little worried when I heard body horror and pregnancy in the same sentence. And yes, on the big screen, there was one particular scene that I did struggle to watch a little bit, but again, it just didn't take the enjoyment away. I loved how it seamlessly went up to the beginning of The Omen as well. Yes, we have had it left open for maybe a potential another sequel, but I guess we'll see. But for me, this was the stronger out of the two between Immaculate and First Omen. The First Omen, I would say, is the second best in the Omen franchise now after the original one. And Nell Tiger-Free, what a performance in this. Like Sydney Sweeney, physically delivering so much, and is just so captivating to watch. Okay, number 6 is a film that was actually dramatically further down my list earlier in the year after a first watch. Then I rewatched it and I fell head over heels in love with it, and I cannot wait to have it on physical media, and this will definitely be a rewatch for me. If I had to pick some films out of this list that I could imagine myself rewatching the most, as in would be a comfort easy watch, it would be this film and Maxine, and that is Abigail from Radio Silence. Now, the reason why it was further down my list before was because I just thought it was a lot more of the same of what we've seen from Radio Silence in terms of Ready or Not or Scream. You know, it ends in a bloodbath and there's like sharp, smart dialogue. Then I was completely submerged in my research of my evolution of Dracula, and I rediscovered my love of vampires and vampire movies. So then when I came back to Abigail, I was already just back in love with vampire films, and I really saw what they'd done, and it's such a funny film, and the gore in it, the violence in it is, it's such a weird thing to say, but it's so fun and funny, and the practical effects in it are fantastic. The lead, what's her name? Alicia Weir as Abigail. Holy moly, I've never seen her in anything before. I've not seen Matilda the musical, but she holds her own in this as Abigail, this child actor with all these adults, and she's just so fun. But we have Catherine Newton, who is always a joy. Dan Stevens, again, always a joy. I know that this was Angus Cloud's last film, so we have that sadness tied to it. I don't know why I've gone from being like, yeah, middle of the road, to absolutely loving this. The only weak point of it for me is that I don't think Matthew Good is a good Dracula. Now, I know they never call him Dracula, but it's a reimagining of Dracula's daughter, so we can infer that he is Dracula. I don't think he was a good choice as Dracula. I don't think when he enters the room, he's meant to be this looming dominant presence that they're afraid of. I don't buy that. But that could be because I mostly know Matthew Good from like period dramas. and I have typecast him as a certain kind of character. But anyway. Okay, number 5, we have Alien Romulus. This was one that I was very excited for. I am a big lover of the Alien franchise, and I was a little skeptical, a little worried. I didn't love Prometheus and Covenant, so I was a little worried. But I am also forgiving of films like Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection, so I thought, how bad does it have to be for me to not like it? Turns out Alien Romulus, a really good film. I think this is a wonderful addition to the Alien franchise. I love that we get to see more of the evil that is the Weyland Company. I love that we get some time on the planet as well. My only issue with it is the inclusion of Ian Holm, who, I don't know why, for some reason I thought he was really acting in it and they de-aged him. But Ian Holm has actually passed away and they were using his image. I don't know how I feel about that. Someone who has passed on and yet their image, like if they'd pre-filmed it and then died, like with Heath Ledger when they released Dark Knight, that's one thing, but it just has a little bit of the ick factor to me, and it's such a shame because his inclusion in it was such a wonderful surprise for me, all the Easter eggs to the previous films in the franchise. So that was the only negative for me. Oh no, I tell a lie, the other negative was the ending. So the creature in the ending of the film was very reminiscent of one from a previous film. I didn't like it in the previous film and I don't like it in this one. It is wild and they really go places with it and I respect them for that. But as a personal option, I didn't really like that. But wonderful addition to the franchise and I can't wait to watch it again. Okay, number 4 is probably another film that people will have a comment on about why is it so high up the list. But this film is so high up the list because of how it made me feel, because of my own personal experience with this film and the fact that I want to have this in physical media and will rewatch it. And that is A Quiet Place Day One. I love the A Quiet Place franchise. The first one is a perfect movie in my opinion. The second one is fine, it's enjoyable. It's a little too actiony, it's a little too Michael Bay for me. But this is the second best in my opinion. And to say that it's a prequel, and I don't know, maybe we could say, well, we know what's going to happen, we know where it's going to go. It didn't quite give us, I think, what we were expecting to happen. And it does teach us a lot of the same stuff we know about the creatures, but they can utilize that in a new and interesting way. For example, they have big crowds and herds of them and can use them out in open space. So while we're seeing the same creatures and not really learning anything new, they are showing us what we already know in a different way. Now, Lupita Nyong'o and Joseph Quinn broke my heart in this film. And the cat, I can't remember the name's cat. It's not Jonesy, is it? That's Alien. Frodo. I think he was called Frodo. The cat and the two leads, they broke my heart. And when I watched this film, I thought the journey of Joseph Quinn's character and the journey of Lupita Nyong'o's character, they were so beautiful, and it was such a wonderful message that kind of conveyed about when everything's sort of stripped away, what is important to you? What is quality over quantity of time and connections with humans? It was just so emotional that by the time the film had finished, I was streaming with tears. I had not expected to go on the emotional journey that I did with that film, and I was bawling my eyes out. I couldn't leave the theatre. I had to wait till the very end and then sort of put my sunglasses on and hide because I'd just been crying, and it took me hours afterwards to fully just decompress and come down from having watched that film. So that is why it's so high, because I had such fun watching it, had such an emotional connection, and I think that they upped it from the second one. I think to say this is the third one, it is better than the second one. And while there was some question of does this need to be a franchise, I don't think it did. But if we're getting entries like this, I don't begrudge it from becoming a franchise. Okay, then number 3, we have Heretic. This is another A24 film that is starring Sophie Thatcher and Hugh Grant. This is one of the most recent watches for me. It was one of those films that I really highly anticipated when I saw it blowing up on Letterboxd and having so many positive reviews. This, in my opinion, is another example of a horror film done well. This is a film that had a wonderful setting. It's a stormy, moody night. These two missionaries are alone in this house with Hugh Grant. There's talk of pie, there's candlelight, and it's very slow. It's a slow burn film. There's not much action. It's very dialogue driven. But the conversations that they're having, the arguments that they get into, it's very theology, philosophy and religion and belief. But to have a film that is essentially just that was so exciting. It does go to some darker places. You do get some of the horror and the scares later on, which I also appreciate. And it is a longer runtime film, but it never felt too long for me. I was never checking the time. So for me, this is my third favourite. I just thought it was wonderful. I've seen some people are sort of middling with it. Not everybody loves it as much. But like I said, you know, I'm boring, so I'm happy watching a film like that where they're just having a really good discussion with some scented candles. Okay, my number 2 is an Irish horror, and that is Oddity. This is perhaps the scariest film that I have seen all year. Again, it's a slow burn. There is not much action happening, but the scares in this are absolutely terrifying. One of the best scares in this for me is a moment that was a delayed scare for me. My brain knew that something was happening and then something changes, and it took my brain a moment to realize that something had happened, and then I jumped and I screamed. So it was a delayed scare, but yes, the scariest film that I have seen, and honestly just one of the best horrors of the year. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. It was an almost perfect horror for me. And finally, we have my number 1. And like I said, there are a lot of horrors that I haven't watched yet this year, so don't be surprised if it's not your own favourite. But for me, it is Osgood Perkins' Longlegs. Now, like Abigail, Longlegs was further down my list. This was another The Substance, where the hype just didn't match the film. I went in with such high expectations with The Substance and with Longlegs because of the hype that was built around it, and it just didn't live up to it. I was expecting it to be the scariest thing I'd ever seen, and because it never reached the highs that had been set as my expectation, it felt like a failure. Then when I rewatched it and the hype had died down and I could just watch it and appreciate it on my own, I saw it for the incredible film that it is. This is the first film I've ever seen of Osgood Perkins in terms of writer and director. I have seen him act, and I cannot wait to check out his other films. This is a filmmaker whose eye and style really, really works for me. And Longlegs, I mean, you have the cult aspect, you have the true crime drama thriller aspect to it. You have the use of T-Rex music and lyrics. You have Nicolas Cage in what feels like the role he was destined to play. He's so unnerving as Longlegs. That moment in the beginning where you see like him just up to here and then he sort of bends down, that scared the crap out of me. And when I watched it in the cinema, there was another scene. It might be where he's in the interrogation room, and I was recoiling. I was literally trying to bury myself further and further back into my chair, because just having him looking at the screen, his eyes burning into you, it was so unnerving. And Maika Monroe is one of the strongest actors I've seen in the last 2 to 3 years. I've just been wowed by every film that she has been in, and this is no different. Such a strong performance. The visuals and imagery in it as well is just so interesting, like I previously said, with cult and religious imagery that just really intrigues me. And so yeah, rewatches matter, because while this was much further down my list, it has become my favourite of the year, and I will definitely be rewatching this. In terms of enjoyment in watching it, I'm not sure I enjoy watching it. It does get under my skin, but it's a good horror experience. Okay guys, so that is my own personal ranking of every new release that I watched in 2024. Now, if you follow me on Letterboxd, once this episode goes out, I will be making this list public on my Letterboxd account, and over the Christmas period, I will be taking some time off. I have pre-recorded some material for you guys, so you don't notice that I'm gone, but I am taking some time off, and I'm planning on catching up on all of those films that I haven't seen yet that I wanted to, and I will be including those in the ranking. So if you do follow me on Letterboxd, you will see the other 2024 horror films that I watch and where they place in the rank. So it will be interesting to see if anything can knock Longlegs off the top spot, but I have a feeling they won't. As always, let me know your own opinions. What were your favourites or standouts or top 10 of 2024? I do not expect you to list your own 44 horror films, but just tell me some of the standouts. And if you see other people's comments, try to be nice in the comments. We all have different opinions. Nobody's ranking is going to be the same as yours, but that would be boring if it was. It makes it more interesting to read differing opinions and rankings, in my opinion. I also just want to take this opportunity to say thank you to every single person who has supported me and the channel this past year. Whether you have just watched a video, liked it, shared it, commented, I see you and I appreciate you. You make it possible to do this, and especially my patrons, you really make it possible for me to do this. So thank you to each and every one of you. Whether you celebrate Christmas or not, I wish you a wonderful holiday period and a safe one as well. Look after yourselves. And yeah, I just hope you enjoy the rest of 2024, and here's to a hopefully wonderful 2025. If you did like this video, then please do give it a like, as it helps the channel and appeases the YouTube overlords, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any other content. I am also doing horror films coming out in 2025, and if you would like extra content on top of everything you get here, there is a link to my Patreon page in the description box below. Over there I have recently ranked all of the non-horror films that I have watched this year, so that will be dropping for them. But in the meantime, thank you as always for stopping by. I really do appreciate it. Take care of yourselves, and I will talk to you in the next one. Bye.